Hello, everybody. Welcome to week 4 of Regenerative Leadership. Today, we're going to be looking at two particular frameworks that I think you'll find are very helpful in continuing to expand our understanding of the nature of change and also the types of organizations that are emerging today that address complex challenges with a different mindset than what we've come to know as traditional, conventional leadership and organizational management. So the two frameworks we're looking at today, one is Ron Heifetz's adaptive leadership. I'll get into that in a minute. And the other is Frederic Laloux's reinventing organizations based on his research and consulting work with organizations around the world in both the for and not-for-profit sector, where he has actually discovered or has allowed to reveal itself what he has called teal organizations. So these two frameworks will be the final webinar that hopefully will lead to help you to really push the boat out with regard to the design of your project and how to work with people, facilitate change, particularly in complex challenges as the ones that I'm sure you are engaging in. So let's get to it right away. Let's start with Ron Heifetz's adaptive leadership. And as I've called it here, a model to help understand the nature of change and address complex challenges. So it's interesting to see that we've found it very hard to scale up sustainability efforts, to really avoid the unanticipated consequences of the decisions that we make with regard to long-term change, as it seems that there is always a tendency for problems to creep in and for negative impacts, either environmental, economic, or social, to creep into strategies for change and action plans. And one of the challenges to that is that we can actually see or not see problems or challenges for what they truly are. So we might be tempted to see the challenge we face as technical only, rather than as adaptive challenges, which require a different mindset and different approach, or really most of the challenges that we do face today are a mix of both technical and adaptive. And this is a key insight from the work of Ron Heifetz at Harvard that we look into. We'll just frame it very quickly so you get an understanding of what we're talking about here. Well, the issue is that if we consider challenges that we come up with as technical and apply technical solutions, yes, eventually we might find ways to make things livable, but bearable rather than being able to thrive, because we've anticipated and worked out any unanticipated consequences to the solutions that we create in order to ensure that we can continue into the future indefinitely, thriving and prospering rather than just surviving. So what does that imply? Well, we need to understand the nature of the challenges that we face. And if you want to read more, I highly recommend this book here that I've cited here at the bottom of the slide. So we need to understand the difference between technical and adaptive challenges. So what are they? Well, technical challenges, as you see here, can be defined easily and clearly. That's why it's tempting to try to put everything in a spreadsheet and then bring up a clear and short-term solution, and obviously to use the money that we have, the funding, the budget, and those people who are in positions of power can actually resolve the problem quite quickly and easily. For example, if you want to change out fluorescent light bulbs with LEDs, well, that's a fairly easy, clear-cut technical problem that apparently doesn't have unintended consequences. However, most of the challenges that we face today, whether it's eradicating poverty or disease or climate change, really is an adaptive challenge, something that requires us to learn new skills, acquire new knowledge. These are also long-term, and they also involve many more people than just me and one other person or a group of people. We certainly can't solve climate change as a community. We have to solve that as a global society with individuals and governments and companies and at every level. and if we're going to eradicate violence or poverty, or empower women, or educate all children. All of these are adaptive challenges and not just technical. And as I was saying before, most challenges really are a mix of both. So technical, I mean, if you're going to eradicate global warming, and you understand that we've got to reduce carbon emissions or methane or nitrous oxide, any of these very, very harmful gases in the atmosphere, there are technical things that we can do that. But in order to make those technical changes happen, we need to become, all of us, more aware, and all of us must be willing to actually change over towards the technologies that actually reduce or even eliminate and remove these gases from the atmosphere. So this requires both clear technical understanding, but also deep-seated long-term learning, and also a combination of the participation of authorities, those in positions of authority at the government level, at the leadership of organizations, and every stakeholder. So residents, citizens, employees, clients, everybody's actually engaged and responsible for making this happen. So let's have a look at some of the different types of problems and how they may be addressed. So we said that technical problems are something that can be solved with the current authority and with the knowledge that we already have. We know about how to solve these problems. So if we go back to the regenerative leadership framework, as we know, we have the personal and the collective dimensions in those 4 quadrants. So for a technical problem, at the personal level, I know that I can solve a problem with what I know already and can do. And collectively, we know that we can make better bridges, we can improve how we use our banking system, how we use to manage time, how we actually employ people, even today in the past, going beyond the pandemic. We can actually provide opportunities for people to work from home. So these are sort of technical solutions that have adaptive challenges, but they're more clear-cut. An example is this in organizations, things like recycling programs. When we have drought, we have water rationing, or if we have massive fires, we have to have technical solutions that will actually take care of the problem, resolve it quickly, so that we can then figure out longer-term solutions. We have drainage systems in the south of Florida, for example, in order to make sure that everybody can still live in what is basically a swamp. And that is a technical solution that it also has unintended consequences, but at least it is technical. At the adaptive level, we need, at the personal level of the quadrant of the regenerative leadership framework, we need to learn new knowledge and new skills at every level: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and social. And collectively, as an organization, we need to work on what are adaptive aspects or dimensions of the organization. How do we improve the climate and culture is not a technical problem. How do we help people overcome resistance to change? How do we nurture and cultivate creativity? How do we build trust in our human resources? And of course, some of the challenges that we face that are adaptive are, how do we engage all our stakeholders? How do we as individuals and as groups let go of the old models and ways of thinking, the old patterns of behavior, so in order to be able to prototype new solutions that are absolutely adaptive rather than technical? So, as I was saying before, once again, most challenges that we face do have a combination of both. So these actually bring us down to what might be aspects of your own project for this course, and then going forward, the work that you want to do or already doing. At the personal level, technical and adaptive problems, they have the requirement that we must have those people who have the power to make change. So we need new leadership and all the participants in the process. We need new knowledge. And this knowledge needs to be context specific. So it has to have that local flavor. We can't address global warming as a global society at the local level. We need to bring it down to what is it that is affecting you and your community in terms of the global warming challenge or the climate change challenge. For example, sea level rise, or wildfires, or any other climate-related crisis or problem, such as climate refugees, people who are leaving, they're emigrating from wherever they live in, geographically because of climate change, going somewhere else and putting pressure on other new social systems. So there are technical aspects of this, and of course, there are adaptive. So collectively, we need to learn to become far more flexible and proactive. We need to anticipate if we're going to have climate refugees or refugees coming from areas, regions in the world where there is a great deal of violence or poverty, coming to maybe some of the more industrialized or developed countries. How do we come together to embrace these shifts in social movement so that people who come into other societies can be accepted, helped, supported, provided with new skills, and helped to assimilate in a new culture where they may not normally be quite as welcomed as they could have been. Can we share power so that we actually involve all people who come to us in shared decision making? When we go, and by we I mean the first world, when we bring our skills and our knowledge to local context, thinking that we can bring help, that we can bring resources to bear, do we actually work with people, or are we trying to solve their problems for them? So these are the kinds of issues that have technical and adaptive components that are very hard to address if we're not willing to engage in that generative dialogue that I was talking about last week. So some of these technical adaptive problems are, for example, zero waste to landfill. How do you actually create an organization that doesn't just do recycling, that actually has no waste leaving the building? It generates no waste. How do you do that? How do you generate community resilience so that all communities can actually not only survive, but adapt flexibly and proactively and thrive despite the climate challenges or poverty challenges or disease challenges? How do we create an economy that can actually feed the world, that has zero toxicity, that does not use fertilizers or pesticides or volatile organic compounds, as in building buildings with paint that doesn't kill people in the long run or create chronic diseases? So all of these are big questions that require understanding the nature of the challenges and the changes we want to make in order to be able to create the strategies that will really address them effectively. So how do we do that? Well, here's where I bring in a combination of adaptive leadership with the regenerative leadership framework, and I've created what I've called the adaptive leadership framework that actually brings together some of the things that we've been talking about over the past 3 weeks. So here I've put together this what, how, and why framework. So let's look at this in part by parts. So initially, as defined in the triple top line and in regeneration and regenerative leadership, we need to understand the what. One is we understand that there are ways, or there are dimensions or components of our reality, of reality itself, in nature, in ourselves, in the natural environment, in the social environment, that are damaged. These are components that need to be restored. We need to find ways to restore and heal what is damaged, what we have damaged, because no other species actually damages the environment as we do. But to do that, we need to redesign everything that we do. All human activity needs to be redesigned. And this is that idea of letting go of old models and actually seeing if we can create new ones. So if we can redesign the new models, then we can replace the old models with new ones and generate that long-term prosperity and health and well-being that we have found so difficult to actually accomplish. So moving forward, how do we do that? Well, we need first the ability to create this idea of a shared purpose. And we've been talking about this. my purpose and your purpose together create a third purpose, which is bigger than yours or my purpose. And that is where we generate that collective trust if we have a shared purpose based on personal integrity. If I have values that you can understand and believe in, you will trust me and vice versa. So if we have these three going together, we have the shared why, we understand the what, we also then can generate the trust to be able to continue and find the how, which, going back to the regenerative leadership framework, is that how we make decisions in this model, this idea of this co-creative, self-organizing model, which is very similar to how all systems in nature work. When you talk of the ant hive or the bee hive, the ant nest, and all these systems that actually are co-creative and self-organizing, with the difference that they don't operate out of free will as we do, and they are not hampered by ego as we are. So there is this conscious work that we must do if we are finally able to set aside our ego and actually create new models that can replace the old ones, where everybody has an opportunity to thrive. And this is not easy to accomplish because, as I was saying, it's hard for us to check our egos and our logos at the door. So moving further, let's have a look at now the work of Frederic Laloux and Teal organizations, and how this can help us not only in how we operate as leaders, but also in how we see our organizations and how we recreate or redesign our organizations around this model. So what Frederic Laloux has done in his research with companies, schools, nursing organizations, even large multinational corporations, he has actually traced the evolution of organizations, as he calls it. And I want to go very quickly through the models that he has seen as the history of organizations, and to have a look at the guiding metaphor that he's identified as identifying these different types of organizations. So we're going to go through these in turn very quickly again, then you can read them through and actually make your own connections. So the type of organizations that you work in or that you are creating. So what does Laloux do? Well, he does a trace throughout history of different types of organizations, beginning with red. So here we see the description of the type of organization, the examples of organizations today, the breakthroughs, because these organizations were relevant in their time. And these organizations continue to operate today, but they don't necessarily respond to the current demand for the types of organization that we need in order to move forward into the future. So you can see that the use of fear to keep people in line and loyal operates very well in certain types of groups. So here you see the mafia, street gangs, tribal militias as operating in parts of the Middle East and everywhere across the world in terms of organized crime. And the breakthroughs of these organizations, they divided labor. They have a very top-down authority. And the metaphor, the guiding metaphor in this organization is the wolf pack. So there is a very strict organization and structure to this type of organization, which makes it relevant and it allows it to operate efficiently. However, not necessarily everybody's choice. So beyond that, as civilization came into existence and we became a larger society, over time, particularly after the Middle Ages, these large organizations emerged in the religious sphere, in the army and how armies were structured, and then eventually in public education and in government, where we came across the need to actually structure our organization in such a way that people would be given the opportunity to participate in society in a better way than in a free-for-all wolf pack type of culture. So when laws emerged and these large organizations were created at the time, for example, the first bureaucracies were supposed to allow citizens to have active participation in their community and their society through through the creation of roles which were highly formalized and written out so people could not be favored over others, and we had the rule of law. And all of these types of organizations were actually very relevant and valuable at their time because they were stable, they had hierarchies, they had processes, they had protocols. And so the church and the army metaphor, this highly stratified, organized type of organization, was very relevant and still operates today. You might recognize them in our public universities or schools and our governments, in the church and the army. Even though some of these have developed more flexible and proactive and more rapidly operating semi-organization, organization within organizations. But as time went on, particularly in the second half of the 20th century, and especially in the 1980s, we came up with this new type of organization, particularly in the corporate world. And this was the notion of management by objectives, where results and performance became the key, where achievement is more important than caring for people. And here we got into this idea of multinational corporations, where performance was the requirement. That was the mantra. And so we did not care about people as much as we cared about results. And so that's where management by objectives came about. And this idea of the organization as a machine that was producing profit, producing products, and really created this rather monstrous operation across the management field of a type of leadership that really was not particularly interested in the well-being of its human resources, which brought, of course, a pendulum swing in what then Laloux discovered as green organizations. These ideas, the idea of these very welcoming and embracing organizations where people were more important than results. So you have these organizations that you might recognize as Southwest or Ben and Jerry's that are actually driven by culture. They're very welcoming, where they have the marketing is very much geared towards embracing and inviting people to be part of the family. And that is exactly the metaphor, the guiding metaphor of that organization. And then Laloux discovered this new type of organization, which he called Teal. And he's found, and if you want to read his work, of course, I've actually cited the book there, the beginning of this presentation. Teal actually brings out a number of new breakthroughs that have been operating before, but which are actually new in terms of the research and consulting work, and seeing that these were economically viable organizational models. And so what are the key breakthroughs for Teal? And these, what he found, were three major, and again, I'm not going to read here. So we have here this whole idea of self-management, and we go back to that idea in adaptive leadership of self-organizing, co-creative work, where teams operate independently of the rest of the organization without hierarchies, where the team actually takes on the responsibility for all the functions of an organization. Is it hiring? Is it designing and manufacturing and selling products or services? Is it training other people? Is it marketing? Is it budgeting? And whoever has the specific expertise needed at any particular point in time takes on the leadership role at that time and at that moment. Another key breakthrough is this idea of wholeness, where the whole person is invited to come to work. And this requires a special type of facilitation, as I was mentioning before, with regard to generative dialogue. How do you invite people to work, to meet, to have that generative dialogue together in such a way that they can actually open up and become the whole person rather than just that rational, logical person? Who sets the agenda? How do you do it? What kind of meetings do you have? Are they top down, or does everybody participate in the creation of the agenda? So again, these are the kinds of questions that you want to ask yourself when you go designing the process, the leadership process in the design of your project or your work. The other third breakthrough is this idea of the evolutionary purpose of the organization. And just to summarize this, the concept here is that the organization is not us. There is something bigger trying to manifest itself through us. That organization is trying to be born, and that if we have the capacity to let our egos aside and listen truly, we will be able to understand and become aware of what that purpose is that the organization is trying to translate into manifestation. And together we can make that happen. And so, using 4 quadrants again, and this is similar to the regenerative leadership framework, Laloux actually identified these elements in the organization, as has Ken Wilber, a philosopher that I use actually for the backbone or the structure of my own framework, though Wilber actually did it in a different orientation. Now, let me explain. If you will see that we have the same 4 quadrants here as Wilber did, as I did for the regenerative leadership framework, except for the fact that I placed the individual and collective perspective below the horizon, and the behaviors of the individual and the collective above the horizon. So here we actually see the difference is that he's done this on the left, and so the behaviors of the organization and of the individual come on the right, run on the top. So that's the only difference. So I've rotated here the framework 90 degrees. However, we have the same elements. We have here people's beliefs and mindsets and the organizational culture. And then on the right, we have people's behavior and the systems and behaviors of the organization on the right. Why is it interesting? Why is this interesting in terms of Laloux? Well, if we take a look at what happens in the orange and the amber organizations in the frameworks that I was showing you before, we can see that both in the compliance and the achievement organizations, the culture of the organization actually promotes internal competition and promotes the achievements of the individual above teams. For example, this is only just one example. Therefore, internally, people realize that the organization really values their work as an individual, and they are motivated, therefore, by external motivators and extrinsic rewards, such as money and recognition, rather than the teamwork and the intrinsic value of the work they do, because the drivers of these organizations are results and compliance. Therefore, how do organizations and people behave? Well, the organization creates structures, processes, and practices that actually promote top-down target setting. So the leadership determines what is going to be done and how, and they therefore then provide individual incentives to people to obtain those results. This actually then drives people to behave in individualistic ways, figuring out that they can actually do better if they work individually rather than with others. And also, in order to meet the objectives, people can turn to cut corners to make the numbers right or look right. And this is where corruption comes into play. So think about your organization. Does this happen in your organization or not? On the other hand, when we look at Thiel, Thiel actually inverts this paradigm in such a way that people are encouraged to explore and challenge their personal beliefs to bring the whole person, that sense of wholeness, to the organization. And then externally, rather than having leaders with power, those people who are the owners of the organization or a situation of authority, they are there because they have the moral authority to provide role models to others. So therefore, they are seen as mentors and coaches. And then the organization, rather than creating fixed processes and procedures and protocols and policies and practices, they actually put in place those that are emerging from these two into creating that organizational culture, which therefore is much more dynamic and flowing. So this may be a bit of a stretch, but we'll be talking about this at the live session, just to make sure that it's clear, to see how you can incorporate these principles or these concepts into your own work. And what we have here is I've just created some more information about the 3 breakthroughs. So I'm not going to read these. You stop the recording if you like and read through them, or if you want to purchase the book and read through that, of course you can do that. So the 3 breakthroughs here, of course, are self-management, and these concepts or principles emerge from those. Wholeness, and these principles or values that emerge from these, from this particular concept of bringing in the whole person. And then in, well, this goes on a little longer. And then evolutionary purpose, resulting in these principles that are worthwhile reading. You'll notice that here at the end, in terms of results and profit, people always ask the question, well, how can we guarantee the results? And that is a great question. And this is one of the most difficult conversations that people might have with somebody who's very skeptical about this model. But let me just read this one. In the long run, there are no trade-offs between purpose and results. If we focus on purpose, the profits or the results will follow. And unfortunately, quite often, because we're so focused on results, we're willing to compromise on purpose. And rather than focus there and really dedicate the time to developing that collective vision, we tend to jump ahead to defining the results that we must obtain and then going for them without working on the underlying purpose and allowing the results to happen. And this is a great challenge, and one that I set you. Can you slow down sufficiently to actually focus on your own purpose and helping others bring up their own and share their purpose in such a way that eventually, from the passion that and the motivation that identifying and working to those purposes, all that energy that it emerges from people will guarantee results, which are better probably than if you just put these results down into a spreadsheet and then try and create a goal around them and objectives. And so these are some of the conversations I hope to have in our last live session. And I hope this has been useful to you.